my hat in the ring because I come from grants administration. That's my background. I threw my hat in the ring just to pacify them. But along the way, I just saw the potential in the work that I could do, the impact that I could have in our diverse businesses in Wisconsin around how do we keep building our small businesses from diverse communities? How do we build capacity? How do we keep providing access to capital? And so I was at the Fund Chamber for about 6 years, really rebuilt the organization, really gave that much more visibility to our Asian American and Hmong communities as well as our businesses, deployed the most microloans in that organization's history, and just leveraged millions of dollars to our small business owners in the state of Wisconsin.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And, I love that, you have figured out a way to do heart work as your career. I consider it a beautiful thing that I get to do work that impacts the lives of people, as well as, be compensated for that. I think that is truly the best of both worlds, and get to represent for women and women of color. And so, now we'll shift gears to, I'm a huge ally and supporter of all women and all people, and especially Team Elevation here in in Wisconsin. And love you guys and appreciate you. And one of the things, I had posted a lot of Stop Asian Hate, over the last year. Definitely watching the numbers and the spike in Asian hate crimes, and them not getting the press coverage and the attention that needs to be had on any population of people that are being targeted due to hate. And so it's just, we want to stop it across the board. But one of the things that surprised me this weekend when I posted after the news of Georgia last week were how many African Americans actually came for me in my inbox as well as publicly to say, why are you standing so strong with the Asian American community? They don't stand strong with us when our rights are breached, or when we are killed in an unjustified manner or due to hate. And so I just, I know we talked about this, but you're so eloquent in how you speak. But I just want you to share, because I know for a fact that you and so many others are on the front line to make sure that every population of color is supported and locking arms. So just please educate.
Yeah, and Sean, when, to your point earlier, right, when we talked about me joining you, excuse me, this morning, it was definitely before the Atlanta shootings, and so I was envisioning our awesome, authentic, lighthearted conversations that also are so deep. And, to be quite honest, even up until this morning, my heart is still very heavy, Sean. And it's not even just about the anti-Asian hate, but it's about our own relations, right, between our own communities of color, and even our relations within our Asian American communities across ethnic lines. The anti-Blackness, the anti-Asianness. And it weighs so heavy on my heart, Sean, because, right, there are so many of us who love each other and support each other, and the strong sisterhood across racial, ethnic lines. It's beyond me when I see, comments like that, and I've seen them. Trust me, I've seen these sorts of comments in the Asian community, in the Hmong community, when the Black Lives Matter movement started. My own friends and colleagues and family members questioned me on, why are you standing up for the Black Lives Matter movement when there's been so much that has happened in our own community, and I think what I always try to remember, even now, is I feel disheartened by this sort of narrative. What I try to remember is that, we're all fighting the same fight.
Right.
We are all fighting the same fight. And we have all been here for each other. We may not have been visible to each other, but I've guarantee you 110, 20, 200%. How many years, decades, and centuries have we stood by each other?
Absolutely.
Maybe not as visible, but I think back to even the civil rights movement. We had Asian Americans as part of that movement way back then.
Right.
I think about, just even within the Asian American history of this country, the Chinese Exclusionary Act, the Japanese American incarceration, all of that. And we had our Black and brown brothers and sisters there with us. Over the years, we have held hands, we have stood in solidarity and unity, but it's so easy to allow others to help us forget the unity that we did have,
right,
and that we continue to have. And it just hurts my heart when our community members say that about each other, when we know, Sean, you and I know,
absolutely,
on a personal level, how we have supported each other through these challenging times.
Absolutely. And the thing is that it is a very purposeful thing that our crew of girlfriends does to make sure that we connect at an authentic level regardless of our backgrounds. And so for I've been encouraging others to just educate themselves and to try to embrace a diverse friend circle. And just because you work in the same office together, or just because you're in school together, it doesn't mean, because what happens is we go to the workplace, but then we worship, shop, hang around, spend time with, break bread with people that look like us. And how can we come to understand one another if we don't spend those type of intimate spaces together? Because that's truly when you gain an understanding of the person beyond
right.
what they look like.
Right. It is true, Sean, right? Like it has to come into our personal lives. We have to have these very real, authentic relationships. Otherwise, we're still just talking the talk, right? And how do we eat? We have kids, Sean, you and I. We have our sons, our daughters, and I think about them, right? And our younger generations all the time about, if we as adults, if we're not exposing our own children to diverse communities and cultures, we're doing them no service, no
Absolutely.
justice.
Absolutely.
And so that's one of my very personal goals in my own life, is when I build my relationships with beautiful sisters like you, I want my kids to see that friendships span across all socioeconomic lines, again, all racial, ethnic lines, against gender lines, everything, Sean.
Right.
We're all human beings,
right.
Goodness, at the end of the day.
Agreed with you completely. So it's been about a year now. My 12-year-old daughter got to meet you and hear you speak. And so Minza was speaking on a panel at a church, the City of Light Church to be exact, amongst other Asian Americans. I mean, there were Japanese, Chinese, Hmong, Laos, Indian. Did I miss anyone? Korean, Filipino, yes. And so, I thought it important because my daughter and I had just had a conversation. One of my really close friends is actually half Laos, half Hmong, and she's been in my daughter's life her entire life. And she said, so much so that she calls her auntie, and she's like, it's auntie, which we know aunt is the correct word, but in the Black community, we have aunties. And so she said, is auntie Chinese? And I said, no. And I said no. And she's like, well, what is she? And so then I pulled out a map of Asia. Like, there's a lot of countries in Asia and a lot of different backgrounds. I was speaking earlier about Kamala Harris being half African American, half Asian American. India is part of Asia.
That's right.
And so it was perfect timing, because then I don't know if it was you or Pastor McKee posted that you were going to be on that panel. And I told Gabrielle, you're going to church with me to see my girlfriend speak and to learn about Asian culture. And she walked away so enlightened And I was like, what did you learn? So she just turned 12 this year, so she was 11. And she said, I learned that there are a lot of different countries in Asia and a lot of different people. And I also learned that there are Christians that are Asian. And so we're on a faith-based station. Talk to some of that conversation, because it was so powerful. Even especially, what really impacted her too was how so many of you shared a common story about the fact that somebody in your family had been a refugee in order to get here.
That's right. No, Sean, and I loved just having you and Gabby come out and just to be there, in the audience to support me, but as well as just to again expose Gabby to so much more, right. In the world. And it was such a powerful panel because, our panel was very diverse, with a different Asian ethnic representation. And that is the one thing, right, is that people just were grouped under this Asian American monolith.
Right.
And we are by no means a monolith.
Right.
But, when I think about my own faith and Christianity at that, I was very privileged. My parents were in Laos. That's where my dad was born. That's where my parents were raised. And my mom came from a much more privileged family at that time. And my mom's family actually were one of the very first in the entire world at that time. This is back in like the 50s, to convert to Christianity, and specifically to Catholicism. Mm-hmm. So when the Vietnam War broke out, the Hmong, for those who aren't familiar, the Hmong were recruited in Laos to fight with the Americans, with the CIA. We were not recognized soldiers. We were like a guerrilla unit for the CIA. And so in the Hmong community, we call that piece of the war the secret war, because we were the U.S.'s secret army fighting communism in Laos. But that's how we came to be in the U.S., was because when the U.S. pulled out of the Vietnam War, they left so many of their allies, including the Hmong, behind. And it was through pure advocacy of Hmong leaders at the time who stood up to the U.S. and said, hey, you guys recruited us. We were fighting right alongside your army. We were rescuing your downed pilots. We were doing all of that right by your side. And through that advocacy, the Hmong were then allowed to come to the U.S. as refugees. But over the years, we have seen a huge growth in Hmong who have converted to Christianity. We have such a huge population who belong to what is the Christian Missionary Alliance. Christian faith, CMAs is what we refer to them. And they're so strong in their faith. It's amazing, Sean. And I just, I grew up Catholic, but I looked at my friends who grew up CMA, and I just thought, oh my God, talk about real faith. Whereas Catholicism to me always felt very structured and, you never really had the space to talk about faith, to be quite honest.
Just your responsive readings. I was in Catholic
school. Right, John, what
right. And also with you.
And so when I became a young adult in college, I was exposed to, so much more than just Catholicism. And that's when I made my pivot to say, my faith has always been a strong part of who I am, despite growing up Catholic. The faith that was instilled through my mom, she's definitely a stout Catholic, but is just a solid rock of faith.
Right.
And that's resonated through me all my life. And, for me, it's about being a dynamic Christian now, right? And how do I use my voice and my spirituality to change narratives and to shift hearts and to just use my voice.
Right.
That's what Christianity and faith has done for me.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, because every morning I ask God to speak through me. I put an extra emphasis on it on mornings like this, when I know that I have an outlet to touch and reach people from anywhere in the world. It's like, let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable to you, because I want him to be seen in everything that I do. So I agree with you completely. Now let's talk about the current state as you see it of the Hmong or the Asian American community, or any community of Asian ethnic background, and the African American community. How can we better come together? Because it's one of those things that the perspective, and I'm asking this question because the majority of my listeners are African American, of this perspective of Asian Americans are only come into our neighborhood to provide a service, to open a store, et cetera, but there's not a real relationship happening there. So what can we do to change some of those stereotypical thought processes, and to build better trust amongst one another? Because I believe that's one of the things, is that there's this trust factor that that is often or lack of trust that's often felt when patronizing different businesses on both sides.
Yeah. Sean, and I think you said this earlier already, right? It's about intentionally building these relationships with each other. I don't know how we get to that next level within our communities if we don't intentionally build these sorts of relationships across racial, ethnic lines. And then I would also say too, Sean, I was telling some of my Elevation friends this, several weeks ago, that I just feel like we need to come together with some of our trusted friends, right, from our Black community. And we need to have a very honest conversation to share our lived experiences with each other as a way to, not to justify. This is not about justifying anything, right? It's not about justifying anti-Blackness in the Asian American community. But how do we come together in a safe space, starting with our own group of friends, to have these honest conversations, to say, yeah, in the Hmong community, we are so divided right now, especially, again, around the Black Lives Matter, because of our lived experiences. Sean, my own family, my own friends who have gone through so much here in Milwaukee and in other parts of the country, right? And they feel like they've been attacked by the Black community. I can't deny their lived experiences.
Right.
But what I can do is share with them the bigger picture, educate them on the history of African Americans here in this country, and remind them that we're in this fight again, and we're fighting one same fight, but how do we share these lived experiences with each other so that there is grace and compassion and empathy?
Right.
But then we talk about how do we do better at showing solidarity and supporting each other.
You're absolutely
right. We can't get there, Sean, until we have these honest conversations with ourselves.
You're right. And I think people would be so surprised to learn, I think about even within, now there's, you're supposed to say African American and Black, because every Black person is not African American. Some are immigrants of just African descent and don't want to be grouped as an African American. Remember when Tiger Woods made up a word to describe himself, and it was like the whole world went in an uproar because he wanted to honor his complete heritage. And so when I think about even within, conversations that I have with my friends who are African, or I had an opportunity to coach a lot of immigrant leaders in the Fortune 100 space. And, one told me, immigrants don't come here to lose. And I thought that was a powerful thing, but also just that with that point you just said of we're all fighting the same fight. And the more we try to segregate ourselves and say, hey, I'm not like you. And when the point is that we're all created in God's image and we're more alike than we are different. Even, within, the expectations in our communities, within our households, the expectations of, immigrants whose families did work so hard to bring their children here, of education, tradition, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, some of the weight that's carried by Asian Americans, by Africans, by so many individuals, Hispanic professionals that whose parents immigrated here or they immigrated here, and then you add on top of that the African American experience of how we were brought here and
Yeah.
the years and years and years of mental health issues that we still are experiencing the effects and residue of. You're right. It is a conversation that needs to be had so we can gain more understanding about one another, because we, even, when you go through college, both you and I have gone through it. No one's digging into that unless you're a specific history major of a specific ethnic culture. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And so it's important. It's important, and mine's the way we met. Actually, Emily Phillips, shout out to EP, and I started a women's initiative called Real Talk Real Women, and it was about improving the communication and amongst women in the workplace across the ethnic lines. And when Emily, who's a white woman, and myself came together to do this initiative, it was really important to both of us that the world not just have a black and white conversation, but that our Hispanic and our Asian American sisters were included as well, because it is a battle for all of us to get to certain positions within the workplace. And we're all dealing with a lot of things as women. But then there's a variance of things that we deal with depending on our ethnic background.
Right.
And so I just want to thank you for your courage of always stepping up and having the tough conversation.
Well, Sean, and I thank you and Emily for being so intentional, right? And I use the word intentional all the time at work, to the point where I'm sure people are rolling their eyes at me every time I say intentional. But at the end of the day, it is about intentionality, but it's about folks who have a platform being intentional and creating that space for others who've not necessarily been given a seat at the table to have a voice at that table. And for me, I always tell people I married into Milwaukee. You've heard me say that a million times, Sean.
Mm-hmm.
But coming into Milwaukee, it was just, the culture here was just jarring. It took me quite a few years to adjust to my life here in Milwaukee, and quite honestly, I hated it. Mm-hmm. Because you could feel the tension in the air as soon as I moved here. And this is how naive I was. My husband's from Milwaukee. I didn't do any research, so I married him, was like, sure, I'll move to Milwaukee. I didn't know Milwaukee was one of the most segregated cities even 15 years ago to now. Mm-hmm. So I moved here blindly and naively, but as soon as I moved here, I knew something was very wrong here, because you felt the tension in the air. You could see the segregation so visibly. And it took me almost 5 years to finally feel like this could be home for me. Mm-hmm. And I bring this up because it was like trying to just knock down doors to even have a voice here in Milwaukee, and just in general, the Asian American community in the state of Wisconsin. We are the tiniest racial group here, and then in Milwaukee, even more so. And so just to have that Asian American visibility it took so much work. But when people like you and Em, right, open that door, give us a platform to join your voices, that's when we start shifting how things are done in our cities, in our communities. It's got to be that intentional.
Absolutely. I agree. And, and I appreciate how intentional that you are. And I'm thankful for our sister circle that's comprised of so many individuals. And I'm thankful for women with the heart to just want to reach out to other women, regardless of what they look like, regardless of what their background is. That's one of the foundations of my organization, the Power Network. It's so important. There's so many amazing women in this city. You're absolutely right. That just don't have a seat at the table, don't have an opportunity to share their voice, don't have an opportunity to take part in conversations like these. So
Right.
it's so important to me that we open up avenues that they are allowed to hear something and do something. And hopefully, the day that I brought Gabrielle to hear you speak, she got to meet your children, and we start planting those seeds of, I think it was at one of our real talks where someone asked the question, what do I do about my college age white son who thinks that all young Black men are evil? And I think all four of us about jumped out of our, leaped out of our seats. And that were on the panel. Shout out to Rebecca Lopez as well, who was on the panel that night. And we all just couldn't wait to say the same thing. Like, what are you modeling at home? It starts at home. If he's gotten all the way to that age and he still has this fear, I mean, and we see right now the hate crimes that are being carried out by very young people.
Exactly. It is so sad, Sean, right? I mean, even with the turmoil that COVID-19 brought, and then, of course, George Floyd's murder last year, too, all of that turmoil has, I think, made each of us, right, individually, look at our own networks of friends and colleagues and dig even deeper to say, in our own home lives, our personal lives, how diverse is your group?
Right.
And it's not a judgment call, Sean, by any means.
Right.
But it's very telling.
Right.
It's very telling of your values, of you, walking the talk. It is very telling.
And of your heart.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Because this is not it's not a show thing.
Right.
My girlfriends that are they're in my family, my kids. It's not a show thing at the point that your kids are like, oh, it's so like the kids called Emily on her birthday and sang to her and left her a voice. It's like, it's not for show. When you connect with one another, we show up for one another through the good and the bad times. The last thing I want to talk about, because we're almost out of time with you, is, you mentioned about empathy and compassion. And one of the debates that's happening across the social media platforms and the news was the murderer's reasoning for why he committed the crimes that he committed last week. And there's been some victim shaming and some victim blaming for the alleged things that they were doing. And, to me, it just goes back to the over-sexualization of women across the world.
Yep.
It goes back to, don't judge someone for how they make a living when you don't know if there were any other options to make a living. Most immigrants are tasked with sending money back home to their families because the thought is that they've made it if they've made it here. And there's so many pressures that you may not understand. So just show compassion and empathy through that, instead of judging. We spend so much time judging.
Oh, yeah, we do, Sean. And, the thing, too, is definitely the over-sexualization of women, and especially of Asian American women, Sean, right?
Yes, absolutely.
There's this Asian women fetish thing that happens, and it's, I don't know. I have no words to even speak to that, because that has just been something that, I've had to deal with all my life, and my sisters and girlfriends of Asian descent, we've had to deal with that all our lives, and it's beyond disgusting.
Yes.
It's humiliating. It's everything, and I was trying to articulate this to another girlfriend just the other night, and I just said, I have no words. But she reminded me, Sean, she said, Mindra, this is the time that we have to find the words. We have to find the words that our voices are heard. And that's something, I mean, even this morning as you and I are talking, Sean, I feel even more limited, in my articulation and vocabulary, because I'm still trying to find the words that will be filled with power and yet with grace, right? To still instill that compassion for each other and not judge each other, but to come together in unity. Because Sean, why don't we see? Why don't we understand that we're all stronger together?
Right. And you know, and that's, I mean, honestly, the patriarchal society that we live in, that we've lived in since the create, unfortunately, since going back as far as we can study, has actually been created. You know, we say the system's broken. No, the systems are doing exactly what they were designed to do, which is to keep us divided and to keep women down. I mean, look at everything that had to happen in order for us to get to where we are now, that you can hold the position that you hold, that I can hold the positions that I hold and be in the rooms that I'm in. And so we've come so far, but we still have so far to go. And you know, and I feel the same way as you, so don't feel bad. You know, there was some footage that came out recently of an inner city nightclub and some young ladies, and they just had a big brawl in the middle of the street. And all I saw was hopelessness and perhaps mental health issues and lack of coping and lack of access to resources. And a girlfriend and I were talking, and I said, I feel speechless. And I am in constant prayer of how I help this demographic of women, because we have to do something. And I don't know what to do yet. And I think for women like us who are solution oriented, it's like, I don't know what to do.
I know, Sean. Right? It's almost feeling helpless and not sure what we do next. But, you know, it's through the grace of God that I continue to put my faith and sisters like you. You know, I had a conversation shortly after you and I were on the phone last week. I had a text conversation with another sister, and she reminded me too, the tide is turning, Sean. Mm-hmm. That's why there's such a big fight right now. That's why all these violent attacks on all of our communities of color, because they feel and they're seeing this tide turning, and they're fighting just as hard to not allow the tide to turn.
Right.
But this is the moment. We need to take advantage of this moment and fight this fight together.
Yes, let us not forget that just last week there was a alleged shooter outside of Kamala Harris's residence.
Right. Sean, you know, but it's because the tide is turning, and we have to stay the course, and we have to stay the course together.
Right. Agreed. Well, thank you so much for being on with me this morning. You know I love you. You know I appreciate you. Thank you for everything that you're doing in the state and in the city to make sure that there's affordable housing for everyone. Thank you for being a part of the Governor's Mental Health Council. Thank you for everything you're doing within the Hmong community and within the Asian American community, period, to just help educate, bring solidarity across the color lines. And also thank you for everything that you did to stand up and represent our state during the election, girl, because you did that. You were out there fighting every single day. I was so proud of you, and am so proud of you.
Thank you, Sean. And again, thank you for just having me on and for our continued authentic sisterhood. You know, and I just want you and all of the listeners today to know that there are so many of us from the Asian American community who stand in solidarity with our Black community.
Yes.
There are so many. And yes, I know there are so many others who don't as well. But, you know, we have to focus on the ones who are standing by our side, and we build stronger from there.
Right.
And I am just grateful and blessed to have all of you in my life, in my own personal journey, and in the journey again of this fight together.
Right.
And I love you.
I love you. I love you. So have a great day. Have a blessed day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. You as well. Bye-bye.
I want to just thank May Yer Thao for being our special guest this morning on the WGLB Monday Morning Mix. You know, the way she just left it, you know, it goes both ways. It's important for us. And I know, you know, as African Americans, we feel like, man, we got dealt the worst cards of everybody who's living in this land of the free, home of the brave. And so why I gotta always be the person going back to help somebody else. And it's like, at the end of the day, we are stronger together. And the more we can lock arms and change, you think about the march across the Selma Bridge, and you think about when all of the different religious leaders and factions, you know, arrived at Selma after what happened on the bridge initially. And you think about the white priest that was murdered, that really spawned outrage throughout the entire country and got more people of other ethnicities interested and involved in the fight for civil rights for African Americans and got them to come to Selma. And so it took all of us. It took all of that. That was the day that President Lyndon Johnson, who was the president at the time, said, "We shall overcome." And the whole country was like, "Wait, what?" Did he just quote? Did he just quote? Basically, he said Black Lives Matter. That's what that meant back in the 60s. And so it would be the equivalent of hearing President Biden say that, which we fortunately have. And so just never forget, we're stronger together. And, it's so much easier. And it's God's intention that we love. Hate has no room in our hearts, and it takes so much more energy to hate than it does to love, including yourself. So on that note, I probably will not talk to you again until next Monday. Thank you for tuning in. I am going to play you some music on my way out. Thank you for listening to the WGLB Monday Morning Mix. And please follow us on social media, Instagram and Facebook at WGLB Radio. And I look forward to talking to you guys next Monday. Bye.